All right, today's topic. This is the third time I'm filming this. Never liked the position, but okay. Anyway, um, why do those in bullshit jobs regularly report themselves unhappy? Now, this is a chapter from a book called Bullshit Jobs, which is a book that I happen to relate a lot. I don't think that. I think actually that most people today work at jobs that serve no purpose to anything. I'm not just talking about the world. I'm also talking about that it doesn't, those jobs don't matter to even to the person that holds the position. So they're essentially worthless and pointless. Workplaces are fascist. They're cults designed to eat your life. Bosses hoard your minutes jealously like dragons hoard gold. The chapter starts with a quote from Nuri on Spiritual Violence Part 1. In this chapter, I'd like to start exploring some of the moral and psychological effects of being trapped inside a bullshit job. In particular, I want to ask the obvious question, why is this even a problem? Or to phrase it more precisely, why does having a pointless job so regularly cause people to be miserable? In the face of it, it's not that obvious that it should. After all, we're talking about people who are effectively being paid often very good money. That's one of the key parts. The people who work at bullshit jobs often get paid more than people who are actually working in essential roles. To do nothing. One might imagine that those being paid to do nothing would consider themselves fortunate, especially when they are more or less left to themselves. But while every now and then I did hear testimonies from those who said they couldn't believe their luck in landing such a position, that the remarkable thing is how very few of them there were. I've heard the same. Whenever you mention to people that there are people that do exist that where they sit in front of a desk, on a desk in front of a screen for like 8 to 9 hours a day, and they virtually do nothing. Perform no tasks but to just forward emails or answer some phone calls for like 5 minutes. These jobs do exist. Many, in fact, seem perplexed by their own reaction, unable to understand why their situation left them feeling so worthless or depressed. Indeed, the fact that there was no clear explanation for their feelings, no story they could tell about themselves, about the nature of their situation and what was wrong about it, often contributed to their misery. Yes, that's the idea of unknowing. Like, you don't know what makes you miserable. You actually do, essentially, but you can't just like put your finger on it, because in a broader picture you will work, right? Regardless, whether it's a bullshit job or not a bullshit job, you're gonna work and get paid. And after a while, that transaction becomes a little bit of it becomes very natural. You just want to get paid for doing less, right? After a while, towards retirement. And this phenomenon is worse right after graduation. At least a galley slave knows that he is oppressed. An office worker forced to sit for 7.5 hours a day pretending to type into a screen for $18 an hour, or a junior member of a consultancy team forced to give the exact same seminar on innovation and creativity week in, week out for $50,000 a year is just confused. In an earlier book about debt, I wrote the phenomenon of moral confusion. I took as my example the fact that throughout human history, most people seem to have agreed that paying back one's debts was the essence of morality and that moneylenders were evil. While the rise of bullshit jobs is comparatively comparatively recent phenomenon, I think that creates a similar moral embarrassment. On the other hand, everyone is encouraged to assume that human beings will always tend to seek their best advantage, that is, to find themselves a situation where they can get the most benefit for the least expenditure of time and effort. That's what I was talking about. The more you work, the less you want to put in effort and get the most. But that only works if you think that what you're doing is meaningful. Unless you think that, then it becomes a little bit of a tool for torment. Because you are not only doing nothing, but you don't deserve the money that you're earning. And for the most part, we do assume this. Especially if we're talking about such matters in the abstract. We can't just give poor people handouts. Then they won't have any incentive to work or look for work. On the other hand, our own experience and those of the people who we are closest to tends to contradict these assumptions at many points. People almost never act and react to situations in quite the way our theories of human nature would predict. The only reasonable conclusion is that, at least in certain key essentials, these theories about human nature are wrong. In this chapter, I don't want to ask why people are so unhappy doing what seems to them meaningless make work, but to think more deeply about what that unhappiness can tell about us, about what people are and what they are basically about. Continues with the story about one young man apparently handed a sinecure who nonetheless found himself unable to handle the situation. I will begin with a short story. The following is the tale of a young man named Eric, whose first experience of the world of work was of a job that proved absolutely, even comically, pointless. Eric. I've had many, many awful jobs. Eric quotes. But the one that was undoubtedly pure, liquid bullshit was my first professional job post-graduation. A dozen years ago, I was the first in my family to attend university, and due to profound naivete about the purpose of higher education, I somehow expected that it would open up for vistas of hitherto unforeseen opportunity. We see this more today. Instead, it offered graduate training schemes of PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, wow, etc. I preferred to sit on the dole for 6 months using my graduate library privileges to read French and Russian novels before the dole forced me to attend an interview which sadly led to a job. That job involved working for a large design firm as its interface administrator. The interface was a content management system, an intranet with graphical user interface, basically designed to enable this company's work to be shared across its 7 offices around the UK. Eric soon discovered that he was hired only because of communication problem in the organization. In other words, he was a duct taper. The entire computer system was necessary only because the partners were unable to pick up the phone and coordinate with one another. Eric continues, the firm was a partnership with each office managed by one partner. All of them seemed to have attended one of the 3 private schools and have the same design school, Royal College of Art, being unbelievably competitive 40-something public school boys. They often tried to outcompete one another to win bids, and on more than one occasion, two different offices had found themselves arriving at the same client's office to pitch work and having to hastily combine their bids in the parking lot of some dismal business park. The interface was designed to make the company super collaborative across all of its offices to ensure that this and other myriad fuck-ups didn't happen again. And my job was to help develop it, run it, and sell it to the staff. The problem was, it soon became apparent that Eric wasn't even really a duct taper. He was a box ticker. One partner insisted on the project, and rather than argue with him, the others tended to agree. They did everything in their power to make sure it didn't work. Eric continues, I should have realized that this was one partner's idea that no one else essentially wanted to implement. Why else would they be paying a 21-year-old history graduate with no IT experience to do this? They'd bought the cheapest software they could find from a bunch of absolute crooks, so it was buggy, prone to crashing, and it looked like a Windows 3.1 screensaver. The entire workforce was paranoid that it was designed to monitor their active productivity, record their keystrokes, or flag that they were torrenting porn on the company internet. And so they wanted nothing to do with it. As I absolutely had no background in coding or software development, there was very little I could do to improve the thing, so I was basically tasked with selling and managing a badly functioning unwanted turf. After a few months, I realized that there was very little for me to do at all most days, aside from answer a few queries from confused designers wanting to know how to upload a file or search for someone's email on the address book. The utter pointlessness of his situation soon led to subtle and then increasingly unsubtle acts of rebellion. Eric continues, I started arriving late and leaving early. I extended the company's policy of a pint on Friday lunchtime into pints every lunchtime. I read novels at my desk. I went out for lunchtime walks that lasted 3 hours. I almost perfected my French reading ability, sitting with my shoes off with a copy of Le Monde and Petit Robert. I tried to quit, and my boss offered me a £2,600 raise, which I reluctantly accepted. They needed me precisely because I didn't have the skills to implement something that they didn't want to implement. And they were willing to pay to keep me. Perhaps one could paraphrase Marx's economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844 here. To forestall their fears of alienation from their own labor, they had to sacrifice me up to a greater alienation from potential human growth. As time went on, Eric became more and more flagrant in his defiance, hoping he could find something he could do that might actually cause him to be fired. He started showing up to work drunk and taking paid business trips for non-existent meetings. I gotta finish the video here, and then I will continue in part 2.